The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Forrest Fitzroy rode into Riverside, Texas, his saddlebags light and his heart heavy with the weight of 2 years spent wandering the frontier. It was 1874, and the West was changing, railroads cutting through the wilderness, cattle barons claiming vast empires, and the old ways of living giving way to something new and uncertain. Forrest had seen it all from the back of his paint horse, Storm, but what awaited him in this dusty town along the Colorado River would change the course of his life forever. The town hummed with the energy of its weekly market day. Merchants hawked their wares along the main street, and a crowd gathered near the courthouse where an auction was set to begin. Forrest dismounted, leading Storm to the water trough outside the saloon. He hadn't planned to stay in Riverside beyond nightfall, but something about the commotion drew him toward the gathering. Selling off the Abernathy estate, a tobacco-chewing old-timer informed him, noticing Forrest's curiosity. Poor souls couldn't keep up with their debts after the drought took their cattle. Banks auctioning everything: furniture, livestock, even the indentured help. Forrest's brow furrowed. Indentured help. In 1874, the old man shrugged. Ain't strictly legal anymore, but the banker calls it assuming contract obligations. Got a young woman who still owes 4 years' service to cover her passage from back east. Bank's selling the contract to whoever bids. Disgust rose in Forrest's throat as he pushed through the crowd, his tall frame and broad shoulders easing his path. He reached the front just as the auctioneer, a weasel-faced man in a too-tight suit, gestured to a woman standing on the wooden platform. Next item: 4-year labor contract for Miss Olivia Anderson. 23 years old, healthy, educated. Can cook, clean, sew, and tends a garden like nobody's business. Starting bid at $50. Forrest felt the air leave his lungs. The woman stood with her spine straight as steel, but her eyes reflected the hollow defeat of someone who had fought too long against impossible odds. Her arms, crossed protectively over her chest, looked oddly empty, as if they were meant to be holding something or someone. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple knot, and despite the grime of hard times, her beauty shone through like a beacon. $50, called a voice from the crowd. 60, shouted another, and Forrest recognized the owner of the saloon, a man with a reputation for cruelty toward his female employees. 75, bellowed a cattle baron whom Forrest had seen earlier, surrounded by ranch hands who gave the woman appraising looks that made Forrest's skin crawl. As the bidding climbed, Olivia's composure never wavered, but Forrest could see the slight tremble in her lips, the whitening of her knuckles as her fingers dug into her arms. $150, Forrest heard himself say, his voice cutting through the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $150 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $175? The saloon keeper cursed and shook his head. The cattle baron narrowed his eyes at Forrest before reluctantly backing down. Sold. To the gentleman in the black hat for $150. Forrest approached the platform as the crowd dispersed, already buzzing about the next items up for auction. The auctioneer thrust papers at him, which Forrest signed without reading, his eyes fixed on Olivia, who now regarded him with a mixture of caution and resignation. As he helped her down from the platform, he could feel the tension in her arm, the way she held herself apart from him even as she followed his lead away from the auction. "You own me now," she said quietly, her voice surprisingly strong despite the circumstances. "What work will you have me do?" Forrest stopped at the edge of the square, turning to face her directly. The setting sun cast long shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her green eyes. "I don't own you, Miss Anderson," he said firmly. "I bought a piece of paper that I intend to burn as soon as we're away from here." He paused, studying her reaction. "We're heading west. I've got land near the Brazos River. Good soil, clean water. Needs work, but it could be something." He cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how forward he sounded. "What I mean to say is, we start a life. Not as owner and owned, but as partners, if you want." Olivia's eyes widened, suspicion clear in her gaze. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Forrest looked at the woman with the empty arms, sensing there was more to her story than the auctioneer had revealed. Because no person should be bought and sold, and because everyone deserves a chance at a new beginning. He offered a small smile. "Including me. And if I refuse? If I want to go my own way, then I'll give you the money to start fresh somewhere else," he said without hesitation. "The choice is yours, Miss Anderson." For the first time since he'd seen her on that platform, a flicker of hope crossed Olivia's face. She glanced back at the town, then at the open road stretching westward. "Tell me about this land of yours, Mr. Fitzroy, Forrest Fitzroy. Tell me about your land, Mr. Fitzroy, and then I'll decide." As the last light faded from the sky, they sat on a bench outside the general store, and Forrest described the homestead he'd claimed 200 acres of rolling prairie. A cabin that needed work but was sturdy enough. A creek running through the property, and endless possibilities. He spoke of his plans to raise horses, maybe some cattle, to build something lasting. And as the stars appeared overhead, Olivia Anderson made her choice. "I'll come with you, Mr. Fitzroy," she said carefully. "Not as owned property, but as my own person. We'll see what kind of life can be built out there." Forrest nodded, relief washing over him. "We'll leave at first light. For tonight, I'll get you a room at the boarding house. One more thing," Olivia added, her voice hardening. "I need to know what kind of man you are, Forrest Fitzroy. I've learned the hard way that men's promises often turn to dust when it suits them." Forrest met her gaze steadily. "I can't prove my character with words, Miss Anderson. Only time will show you who I am. But I give you my word you'll be safe with me and free to leave whenever you choose." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Then I suppose we'll both be taking a chance on tomorrow." As dawn broke over Riverside, Forrest waited outside the boarding house with Storm and a second horse he'd purchased, a gentle mare with a chestnut coat. Olivia emerged with a small cloth bundle that contained everything she owned in the world. She wore a simple blue dress, patched in places but clean, and her hair hung in a braid down her back. "You bought another horse," she observed, approaching the animals cautiously. "Figured you'd need your own mount for the journey. Her name's Penny." Olivia reached out tentatively to stroke the mare's nose. "Hello, Penny," she murmured, and Forrest noticed how naturally she handled the animal despite her obvious exhaustion. "You've ridden before." "I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania. We had horses." A shadow passed over her face. Before everything changed, Forrest sensed there was much she wasn't saying, but he didn't press. "It's a 3-day ride to the homestead if the weather holds. We should get moving before the day gets too hot." They rode out of Riverside as the town was just beginning to stir, following the road that wound alongside the Colorado River before branching west toward the Brazos. Olivia rode silently, her posture perfect despite what must have been years since she'd last been on horseback. Forrest kept a respectful distance, conscious of giving her space. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and they stopped in the shade of a cluster of oak trees. Forrest distributed jerky, biscuits, and water from his canteen. Olivia ate slowly, methodically, as if rationing each bite. "May I ask what brought you to Texas?" Forrest ventured, breaking the long silence between them. Olivia considered him for a moment before answering. "Dreams. The same as anyone, I suppose. After the war, my family's farm was struggling. My father died at Gettysburg and my mother couldn't manage alone. She brushed crumbs from her skirt. I saw an advertisement for domestic help needed by a respectable family in Texas. Good wages, chance for advancement, they said. The Abernathys, she nodded. They seemed kind at first. But the drought came and cattle died and debts mounted. Mrs. Abernathy took ill and her voice faltered. When they couldn't pay me anymore, they said I owed them for room and board. The debt kept growing until they had to sell everything, including my contract. Forrest's jaw tightened. That's not right. It's not even legal. Many things happen that aren't right, Mr. Fitzroy. Her green eyes met his, unflinching. The law protects those who write it. They continued riding through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from farmland to more rugged terrain. As the sun began to set, Forrest led them to a small clearing near a creek. "We'll camp here for the night," he said, dismounting. "It's sheltered, and there's fresh water." Olivia slid from her horse with surprising grace, though Forrest noticed her wince slightly as her feet hit the ground. She'd been putting on a brave face, but the long day in the saddle after who knew how long had clearly taken its toll. "Let me tend to the horses," Forrest offered. "You can rest." "I'm not an invalid, Mr. Fitzroy," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "I can do my share." Forrest nodded, respecting her pride. "Then you gather firewood while I set up camp, and please call me Forrest. Mr. Fitzroy makes me feel like my father." As they worked, Forrest observed Olivia from the corner of his eye. Despite her exhaustion, she moved with purpose, collecting an impressive armload of wood. When she returned to the clearing, he had already laid out bedrolls on opposite sides of where the fire would be and was unpacking supplies. They built the fire together, and Forrest prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and coffee. As they ate, the silence between them grew more comfortable, less strained. "Where did you learn to cook?" Olivia asked, accepting a second cup of surprisingly decent coffee. "My mother made sure all her children could fend for themselves," Forrest replied with a small smile. "And then the war came and I got plenty of practice." "You fought, Union cavalry, enlisted in '63, fought until Appomattox." He stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward into the darkening sky. "Came west afterward like many did, couldn't settle back into the old ways." Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My brother felt the same. After Gettysburg, he came home different, restless. He left for California 2 years later. I haven't heard from him since." "The war changed everything," Forrest said quietly, "for all of us." As night fell completely, the temperature dropped and Olivia pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Without comment, Forrest took his spare blanket and offered it to her. She hesitated before accepting. "Thank you. Get some rest, Miss Anderson. We have another long day tomorrow." "Olivia," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Forrest, then you should call me Olivia." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Forrest." As Forrest lay on his bedroll, staring up at the vast canopy of stars, he found himself wondering about the woman sleeping across the fire. What had she lost that left her arms looking so empty? What dreams had been shattered before he found her on that auction block? And what madness had possessed him to offer her a life alongside him when he barely knew her? Yet something about Olivia Anderson called to him her quiet dignity, her resilience, the flash of spirit he occasionally glimpsed beneath her careful reserve. It wasn't charity that had driven him to buy her contract, nor was it merely outrage at the injustice of her situation. It was recognition, perhaps one survivor seeing another. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Forrest woke to find Olivia already up, tending to a small fire and brewing coffee in his pot. "You're an early riser," he observed, sitting up and running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "Old habits," she replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to him. The Abernathys expected breakfast on the table before sunrise. Forrest accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Did they treat you badly? Beyond the debt situation, I mean." Olivia considered the question as she poured her own coffee. "Not with cruelty, if that's what you're asking. Just indifference, as if I were a piece of furniture useful but not really seen." She sipped her coffee, her eyes focused on something distant. "It was the loneliness that wore on me more than anything." They broke camp efficiently and were back on the trail as the sun cleared the horizon. The day's journey took them through increasingly wild country rocky outcroppings, stands of mesquite and oak, dry creek beds that would become raging torrents during the rainy season. Despite the rugged terrain, Olivia kept pace without complaint, though Forrest noticed how she sometimes rubbed her lower back when she thought he wasn't looking. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering in the west, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. "There's a line shack about an hour's ride from here," Forrest said, studying the sky with concern. "We should push on and try to reach it before the storm hits." They urged their horses to a faster pace, the animals sensing the approaching storm and needing little encouragement. The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as a small, weathered cabin came into view, tucked against the side of a low hill. "That's it," Forrest called over the rising wind. "It's not much, but it'll keep us dry." They reached the line shack just as the heavens opened. Forrest quickly led the horses to a lean-to at the side of the cabin while Olivia hurried inside with their supplies. The shack was dusty, but found a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 stools, and a narrow cot against one wall. "I'll sleep on the floor," Forrest said as he came through the door, water streaming from his hat and coat. "You take the cot." Olivia was already kneeling at the fireplace, arranging kindling. "I saw an old trunk in the corner with some blankets. They smell musty but look clean enough." Soon a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls as rain drummed on the roof. They hung their wet outer garments near the fire to dry and shared a meal of the last of their provisions. "We should reach the homestead by tomorrow afternoon," Forrest said, leaning back against the wall and stretching his long legs toward the fire. "There's a small town about 10 miles south Oak Ridge. We can stock up on supplies there later in the week." "What's the cabin like, at your homestead?" Olivia asked, curled up on the cot with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Larger than this," Forrest smiled. 2 rooms with a lean-to kitchen I added last fall. It needs work. The roof leaks in one corner and the porch steps are rotting. But the walls are solid and there's good ventilation for summer heat. And the land, good grassland mostly, with stands of oak and pecan near the creek, soils rich enough near the water for a garden. He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "It's rough living, Olivia." "I won't pretend otherwise. The winters are mild compared to Pennsylvania, but the summers are brutal. There are dangers: snakes, coyotes, the occasional rustler or bandit. I'm not afraid of hard work or hardship," she replied, her chin lifting slightly. "I've faced both before. I don't doubt it." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him. "May I ask, what happened before the Abernathys? Sometimes I see a look in your eyes and your arms." He trailed off, uncertain how to phrase his observation without causing pain. Olivia's face went still, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. For a long moment, Forrest thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft he had to lean forward to hear it over the rain. "I had a child, a daughter, Charlotte." her hands unconsciously curved as if cradling an infant. She was born on the journey to Texas. Her father was a mistake, a man who promised marriage but disappeared when I told him I was with child. Forrest remained silent, giving her space to continue at her own pace. She was beautiful, Olivia whispered, a ghost of a smile crossing her face. So perfect and strong despite being born 2 months early. She fought to live, and for 8 months she was my entire world. The smile faded. Then the fever came. It swept through the settlement where we were staying. Charlotte, she was too small, too fragile. Her voice broke. I held her until the end, and then my arms were empty. The rain pounded harder on the roof, filling the silence that followed her words. "I'm sorry," Forrest said finally, the words inadequate but sincere. "The Abernathys hired me soon after. I think Mrs. Abernathy felt sorry for me, a young widow, they assumed, with no family and no prospects. They never knew the truth." She met his eyes across the fire. "Now you know what kind of woman you've brought into your life, Forrest Fitzroy. Unwed mother, fallen woman, all those things decent society shuns. I see a strong woman who survived unimaginable loss," Forrest replied without hesitation. "A woman who deserves respect, not judgment." He paused, then added quietly, "We all carry our past with us, Olivia. Mine isn't without shadows either." The firelight caught the gleam of tears in her eyes, quickly blinked away. "Thank you," she said simply. They fell silent, listening to the storm rage outside. Eventually, Olivia's breathing deepened as exhaustion claimed her. Forrest remained awake, watching over her as she slept, feeling a protective instinct he hadn't experienced in years. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a brilliant blue sky. They set out early, riding through countryside that grew increasingly familiar to Forrest with each mile. By mid-afternoon, as he had predicted, they crested a low rise and the homestead came into view. It was a modest, spread-a-log cabin with a stone chimney nestled in a grove of oak trees, a small barn and corral to one side, and beyond, rolling acres of grassland stretching to a line of trees that marked the creek. Wildflowers dotted the meadow, their bright colors swaying in the gentle breeze. "There it is," Forrest said, reining storm to a halt. "Home." Olivia studied the scene, her expression unreadable. "It's lovely," she said finally. "Peaceful." They rode down to the cabin, and Forrest felt a surge of self-consciousness as he saw the property through Olivia's eyes, the weathered porch with its sagging steps, the yard overgrown after his 2-month absence, the general air of a place maintained by a man living alone. "It needs a woman's touch," he acknowledged as they dismounted. "I've been more concerned with function than comfort." "It needs care," Olivia corrected gently, "and that's something I know how to give." They stabled the horses in the barn, then Forrest led Olivia to the cabin. Inside, it was simple but clean, a main room with a fireplace, table, and chairs, shelves stocked with basic supplies, and a rocking chair near the hearth. A doorway led to a smaller bedroom with a bed frame supporting a straw tick mattress. The lean-to kitchen held a cast iron stove, work table, and shelves for dishes and cookware. "You'll take the bedroom," Forrest said, setting down their bags. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Olivia looked as if she might protest, then nodded. "Thank you. I'll fetch water from the well, and there's dried meat and beans in the larder. It's not much of a welcome meal, but it's perfect," Olivia interrupted. "Let me help with dinner. It's been a long time since I cooked in a proper kitchen, even one as rustic as this." As they prepared the simple meal together, Forrest found himself relaxing into a domestic rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Olivia moved efficiently, making the most of the limited ingredients, adding wild onions she discovered growing near the porch to the beans for flavor. They ate at the rough-hewn table, the open door letting in the last of the day's light and the sounds of birds settling for the night. For the first time since he'd known her, Olivia seemed truly at ease, the constant tension in her shoulders finally releasing. "Tomorrow I'll show you the rest of the property," Forrest said as they finished their meal. "There's good land for a garden near the creek, and I started an orchard last year, just a few apple and peach trees, but they took well. I'd like that." Olivia gathered their plates. "Forrest, I want to thank you, not just for buying my contract, but for offering me a place here, a purpose. You don't need to thank me. This arrangement benefits us both." He hesitated, then added, "I've been alone a long time, Olivia, having someone to share the work and the rewards." "It's what I've wanted." She studied him thoughtfully. "Have you never married?" "Once, before the war." His voice grew quieter. "Mary Beth. We were young, barely 18 when we wed. She died of typhoid while I was fighting at Vicksburg. I'm sorry." "It was a lifetime ago," he smiled sadly. "Sometimes I wonder what kind of man I would have become if she had lived, if we had built a life together as planned." "We can't know those things," Olivia said softly. "We can only move forward with what we have now." "Yes," Forrest agreed, meeting her gaze across the table. "What we have now." The days fell into a pattern as spring deepened into summer. Each morning, Forrest rose at dawn to tend to the livestock, the horses, the 2 milk cows he'd purchased in Oak Ridge, and the half-dozen chickens that provided fresh eggs. Olivia prepared breakfast, and then turned her attention to transforming the cabin into a home. She scoured every surface, repaired torn curtains, and added touches that somehow made the rustic space feel warm and inviting: wildflowers in a tin can on the table, a braided rug before the hearth, shelves rearranged for better convenience. She cleared the overgrown patch near the creek and planted a vegetable garden, coaxing seeds from the general store into flourishing rows of beans, corn, tomatoes, and squash. Forrest built her a proper washboard and tub, repaired the porch steps, and fixed the leaking roof. Together they whitewashed the cabin's interior, their laughter echoing as they spattered each other with lime and water. In the cool of the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the fireflies rise from the meadow grass while sharing stories of their lives before they met. They worked side by side, their initial wariness gradually giving way to companionable ease. Forrest respected the boundaries Olivia established, never pressuring her for more than she was willing to give. For her part, Olivia seemed to blossom with each passing day, her natural resilience and intelligence finding expression in the life they were building. Yet for all their growing comfort with each other, there remained an unspoken question between them: what exactly were they to each other? Not husband and wife, not merely business partners, but something undefined and still taking shape. The question came to a head one sweltering July afternoon. Forrest had ridden out at dawn to check on a break in the fence line at the property's eastern boundary. By mid-morning, Olivia began to worry as dark clouds gathered on the horizon and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. When the storm broke with sudden violence, sending sheets of rain slashing across the yard and lightning splitting the sky, Olivia stood at the window watching for any sign of Forrest. As 1 hour stretched into 2, her concern deepened into fear. Just as she was preparing to saddle Penny and go searching herself, she spotted a figure emerging from the tree-lined forest, hunched in his saddle, Storm struggling through mud that reached past his fetlocks. Olivia ran into the downpour, helping Forrest dismount. He was soaked to the skin and shivering despite the summer heat, his face unnaturally pale. "I'm all right," he insisted as she helped him into the cabin. The lightning spooked Storm, He threw me and I took a bad landing. Just need to warm up." But as she helped him out of his sodden clothes, Olivia discovered an angry gash on his forearm, already showing signs of infection, and bruising across his ribs that suggested at least one might be cracked. Forrest's admission that he'd lain unconscious for nearly an hour before managing to catch storm and mount again sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the rain. She worked swiftly, cleaning and bandaging the wound, binding his ribs and helping him into dry clothes. When he was settled in his bed, Olivia had insisted he take the bedroom despite his protests. She brought him hot broth and willow bark tea for the pain. "You should have been more careful," she scolded, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "What would I have done if you hadn't made it back?" Forrest caught her hand as she adjusted the blanket. "I'm sorry for worrying you," he said, his blue eyes serious despite the fever beginning to flush his cheeks. "But I had to come back. I promised you a new life, Olivia. I won't break that promise." The raw sincerity in his voice stripped away the last of her defenses. Olivia realized with startling clarity that somewhere between Riverside and this moment, she had begun to care deeply for this quiet, honorable man who had offered her freedom and asked for nothing in return. Through the night, she tended him as his fever rose and fell, bathing his face with cool water, changing the bandage on his arm and listening to his delirious murmurs. In his fever dreams, he called for her, his voice breaking with emotion as he confessed fears he never spoke when awake, that he would fail at building this life, that he wasn't worthy of her trust, that she would leave once she realized how little he truly had to offer. "I'm here," she whispered, holding his hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Forrest." By morning, his fever broke, and he woke clear-eyed though weakened. Olivia was dozing in the chair beside the bed, her hand still clasping his. The sight of her there, her auburn hair tumbling from its pins and dark smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes, filled Forrest with a tenderness that caught in his throat. "Olivia," he said softly. She woke instantly, relief flooding her face. "Your fever's broken. How do you feel?" "Better, thanks to you." He tried to sit up and winced at the pain in his ribs. "I'm sorry for causing such trouble." "Hush," she chided, helping him adjust his position. "That's what partners do, care for each other when needed." The word partners hung between them, suddenly insufficient for what they had become to each other. Forrest looked at the woman who had transformed not just his home but his entire life, and found he could no longer keep his feelings unspoken. "Olivia," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "These past months, having you here, it's been more than I ever hoped for. I know we started this as an arrangement, a practical solution to both our problems, but it's become something else, at least for me." She went very still, her green eyes wide and vulnerable. "I care for you," he continued, "deeply. I don't expect you to feel the same, and nothing has to change if you don't want it to, but I needed you to know." For a long moment, Olivia said nothing, and Forrest's heart sank. Then slowly, carefully, she leaned forward and placed her hand against his cheek. "I thought I was done with dreams," she whispered. "After Charlotte, after everything. I convinced myself it was safer not to want, not to hope. But you, Forrest Fitzroy, you made me believe in possibilities again." She smiled, tears brightening her eyes. "I care for you too, more than I thought I could ever care for anyone again." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, both were smiling despite the tears on their cheeks. "We'll take this slowly," Forrest promised. "There's no rush." "No," Olivia agreed. "We have time to do this right." And they did. Through Forrest's recovery and into the harvest season, their relationship deepened and evolved. They continued to sleep separately, honoring traditional propriety despite the unconventional nature of their situation. Forrest courted Olivia, properly bringing her wildflowers, reading to her from his small collection of books in the evenings, listening with genuine interest to her ideas for improving the homestead. In late September, with the first hint of autumn crispness in the air, Forrest took Olivia into Oak Ridge. While she visited the general store for supplies, he met with the town's preacher to discuss their situation. The kindly older man agreed to visit the homestead the following Sunday to properly marry them if that was what they both truly wanted. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Forrest took Olivia's hand. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in his chest. "You came here as my partner in building this homestead, and you've been true to that commitment in every way. But I find myself wanting more, Olivia. I want to build not just a farm with you, but a family." He slid from the bench onto one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Olivia Anderson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because of any contract or obligation, but because," his voice caught, "because I love you." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Forrest. I love you too so much it terrifies me sometimes." He rose and gathered her in his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt for their future together. The wedding took place the following Sunday, a simple ceremony in front of their cabin with only the preacher, his wife, and a few neighbors from nearby homesteads as witnesses. Olivia wore a new blue dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Forrest, cleanly shaved and wearing his best shirt, looked at her with such adoration that the preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," declared the preacher, beaming at the couple. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their neighbors celebrated with them, sharing a feast that Olivia had prepared with help from the women: roast chicken, fresh bread, garden vegetables, and a honey cake for dessert. There was music from a neighbor's fiddle, dancing in the yard, and congratulations all around for the couple who had transformed a bachelor's lonely homestead into one of the most promising farms in the area. As twilight fell and their guests departed, Forrest and Olivia stood hand in hand on their porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the trail. "Mrs. Fitzroy," Forrest said, savoring the words. "How does it sound?" "Like home," Olivia replied, leaning into his embrace. "Like belonging." That night, as husband and wife, they came together with a tenderness born of deep trust and genuine love. For Olivia, who had known only betrayal and loss in her previous experience, Forrest's gentle patience and profound respect healed wounds she had thought would never mend. For Forrest, the gift of Olivia's trust and vulnerability was more precious than anything he had ever known. As they lay together in the quiet darkness, Olivia nestled against his chest. She spoke of something that had been on her mind. "Forrest," she began hesitantly, Would you mind if we planted a tree for Charlotte, somewhere near the house where I could see it growing?" Forrest tightened his arms around her. "I think that's a beautiful idea. A peach tree, maybe. They bloom so pretty in the spring." "Yes," she whispered, gratitude in her voice. "A peach tree would be perfect." The following morning, they selected a spot within view of the kitchen window and planted a young peach sapling. As Olivia patted the earth around its roots, Forrest placed a small, smooth stone at its base. "So she'll always be remembered," he said simply. "As the first child to touch your heart." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she leaned against him. "Thank you for understanding." "She'll always be part of you," Forrest said, "and that makes her part of us too." Winter came early that year, bringing freezing rain and sleet that kept them indoors for days at a time. They used the enforced confinement to make plans for the spring, expanding the garden, adding to their small herd of cattle, perhaps building a proper stable for the horses that were becoming Forrest's pride and joy. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, Olivia sewing or mending while Forrest read aloud from one of his treasured books. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing memories and dreams, building the foundation of their life together, one conversation at a time. It was during one such evening in late January, as wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, that Olivia set aside her sewing and took Forrest's hand. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Something wonderful, I hope." Forrest looked up from his book, concern immediately crossing his face at her serious expression. "What is it, love?" Olivia guided his hand to rest against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child, Forrest, in the summer." For a moment he sat frozen, his blue eyes wide with shock. Then a smile broke across his face like sunrise, and he gathered her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the cat dozing by the hearth. "A baby. Oh, Olivia, that's words failed him, and he simply held her, his face buried in her hair. When he finally pulled back, he saw uncertainty in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "After Charlotte, I don't know if I could bear to lose another child." Forrest framed her face with his hands. "Listen to me, Olivia Fitzroy. This child will have everything we can give it: love, protection, the best care possible. We'll ride into Austin for a proper doctor if needed. You won't face any of this alone." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I can't promise there won't be hardships or sorrows. Life doesn't allow such promises. But I swear to you, whatever comes, we'll face it together." As winter gave way to spring, Olivia's body blossomed with new life. Forrest watched over her with devoted attention, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day and taking on many of her usual chores as her pregnancy advanced. Yet Olivia remained active, tending her garden with joy and preparing the small second room of the cabin as a nursery. Word spread among their neighbors about the coming baby, and the women of the area organized a quilting bee to create a beautiful blanket for the child. Olivia found herself embraced by a community of frontier wives and mothers who shared advice, remedies for morning sickness, and stories of their own childbearing experiences. After years of isolation, this circle of female friendship was a precious gift. In early June, with wildflowers painting the meadow in a riot of colors and Charlotte's peach tree heavy with fruit, Olivia went into labor. The midwife from Oak Ridge arrived promptly, shooing a nervous Forrest out to the porch where he paced for hours, jumping at every sound from within. As twilight settled over the land, a new cry joined the chorus of evening birds, strong, indignant, and undeniably alive. Minutes later, the midwife appeared at the door, her weathered face wreathed in smiles. "Mr. Fitzroy," she announced, "you have a son. A fine, healthy boy with a good set of lungs on him." Forrest staggered into the cabin on legs gone suddenly weak. There, propped up against pillows and looking exhausted but radiant, sat Olivia, a small bundle cradled in her arms. As Forrest approached the bed, she turned back the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair and a determined chin that already resembled his father's. "Frederick Thomas Fitzroy," Olivia said softly. "After your father and mine, if that suits you." "It's perfect," Forrest whispered, overwhelmed by love for this tiny being and the woman who had brought him into the world. "He's perfect. You're perfect." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm around Olivia's shoulders and the other hand gently touching his son's downy head. "Hello, Frederick," he murmured. "Welcome to our family." The midwife quietly excused herself, promising to return the next day to check on mother and child. As darkness fell completely, the small family remained together in the gentle pool of lamplight, Olivia nursing the baby, Forrest watching them both with wonder, their hearts full to bursting with love and gratitude. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Olivia said, looking up at her husband with tears in her eyes. "After losing everything, I believed my chance at joy was over. But you, Forrest, you saw me when I was at my lowest. You offered me not charity but partnership, not pity but respect." She touched his cheek. "You gave me back my future." Forrest turned his face to kiss her palm. "You gave me a home, Olivia, not just a house but a true home. You filled these empty rooms with warmth and purpose." He smiled, glancing down at their sleeping son. "And now you've given me a family. There aren't words enough to thank you." Frederick Thomas Fitzroy thrived under his parents' devoted care. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the cabin on sturdy legs, getting into everything within reach and babbling a mixture of real words and his own invented language. His dark hair and blue eyes were a perfect blend of his parents' features, and his curious, determined nature kept them constantly on their toes. Life on the homestead prospered as well. Forrest's small herd of horses gained a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as San Antonio. Olivia's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs, and women from Oak Ridge and surrounding farms began to seek her remedies for common ailments. The peach orchard flourished, providing fruit for preserves that Olivia sold at the general store in town. They added a proper kitchen to the cabin and expanded the main room to create a cozy parlor. Forrest built sturdy furniture, a larger table for family meals, a cradle for the baby, shelves for Olivia's growing collection of books and plant specimens. Neighbors remarked on the transformation of the once bare homestead into one of the most welcoming homes in the county. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1878, 4 years after Forrest had first seen Olivia at the auction in Riverside, they sat on their expanded porch watching 3-year-old Frederick chase butterflies in the yard. Charlotte's peach tree, now tall and spreading, cast dappled shade over a corner of the garden. "I received a letter from Mary today," Olivia said, referring to a friend she had made during her time with the Abernathys who now lived in Austin. "She says that banker who sold my contract finally got his comeuppance. Apparently he was caught falsifying loan documents. He's facing prison time." Forrest nodded, satisfaction in his expression. "Justice catches up eventually, it seems." "It does." Olivia hesitated, then placed Forrest's hand over her middle, a familiar gesture that never failed to make his heart skip. "And sometimes life gives us second chances we never expected." His eyes widened. "Again?" "Really?" She nodded, happiness radiating from her smile. "In the spring. Frederick will have a little brother or sister." Forrest pulled her into his arms, laughing with pure joy. Their son, hearing his father's laughter, abandoned his butterfly chase to run back to the porch. "What's funny, Papa?" Frederick asked, climbing into Forrest's lap. "Nothing's funny, sweetheart," Olivia answered, smoothing his dark curls. "Papa's just happy because our family is growing. You're going to be a big brother." Frederick considered this news with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster. "Will the baby like horses like me and Papa?" "I expect so," Forrest chuckled. "It's in the Fitzroy blood." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the homestead they had built together, Forrest looked at his wife and son, the family he had never expected to have, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. From the moment he had seen Olivia standing on that auction block, her arms empty but her spirit unbroken, to this peaceful evening surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor, their journey had been one of healing and growth. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, noticing his contemplative expression. About beginnings, Forrest replied, taking her hand. About how sometimes the hardest days lead us to the most beautiful destinations. Olivia squeezed his hand, understanding in her eyes. We start a life, she murmured, echoing the words he had spoken to her 4 years earlier. That's what you said to me in Riverside. The best decision I ever made, Forrest said softly. As twilight deepened into night, Frederick dozed against his father's chest, and Olivia leaned her head on Forrest's shoulder. Together they watched the first stars appear in the vast Texas sky, their hearts full with the life they had built, a life founded on respect, nurtured by courage, and flourishing with love. In May of 1879, their daughter was born, Emma Grace Fitzroy, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. Frederick, now 4 years old, appointed himself her chief protector, solemnly explaining the workings of the farm to his infant sister and bringing her treasures he found in the yard, a shiny pebble, a perfect feather, a wildflower carefully picked with stubby fingers. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. The children grew strong and curious, surrounded by the love of their parents and the freedom of country living. Forrest's horse breeding business expanded to include a partnership with a cavalry officer turned rancher, bringing financial security and recognition to the Fitzroy name. Olivia's knowledge of medicinal plants led to a small but steady trade in remedies, and eventually to her serving as an unofficial midwife for nearby homesteads. They weathered challenges together: a drought that threatened their crops, a fever that swept through the area and left Frederick weakened for months, occasional conflicts with cattle barons who sought to expand their grazing lands at the expense of smaller homesteaders. Through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome. In 1884, 10 years after they had first met, Forrest and Olivia stood hand in hand at the edge of their property, surveying what they had built. The original cabin was now a proper home with 4 bedrooms and a stone fireplace in each main room. A separate building housed Olivia's herb workshop. The barn had been expanded to accommodate Forrest's growing herd of horses, and fields of wheat and corn stretched toward the horizon. I barely recognize it, Olivia marveled. Sometimes I think about that woman you saw at the auction, how lost she was, how empty her arms felt. If someone had told her then what her life would become. She wouldn't have believed it, Forrest finished, pulling her close. No more than I would have believed that impulsive decision would lead to all this. He gestured to their home, where Frederick and Emma could be seen playing with their youngest brother James, born 2 years earlier. You ever regret it? Olivia asked, a teasing light in her eyes. Buying a stranger's contract and offering her a life. Only when you insist on making me eat those green things from your garden, Forrest replied with mock seriousness. They're called vegetables, Mr. Fitzroy, and they're good for you. So you keep saying, Mrs. Fitzroy. He kissed her softly, still marveling after all these years at the miracle of having her in his life. And no, I have never regretted a single moment with you, not one. That evening, as they gathered around the table for the family dinner that had become their cherished tradition, Forrest looked at the faces of his wife and children, at Frederick's thoughtful expression, so like his own, at Emma's bright smile that mirrored her mother's, at little James's mischievous grin, and felt a completeness he had never thought possible. "What are you smiling about, Papa?" Emma asked, passing him the bread basket. "Just counting my blessings," Forrest replied, "and they are many." Later, as the children slept and Forrest and Olivia sat on the porch swing watching the moon rise over their land, she leaned against his shoulder with a contented sigh. "You remember what you said to me that first night in Riverside?" she asked. "When I asked what you expected of me." "I said we'd start a life," Forrest recalled, his arm tightening around her. "As partners." "We did more than that," Olivia said softly. "We built a legacy, not just the farm or the children, but something less tangible, a testimony to what can grow from respect and kindness." She turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You saved me, Forrest Fitzroy." "No," he corrected gently. "We saved each other." As the years continued to pass, the Fitzroy homestead became a landmark in the region, not for its size or grandeur, but for the spirit of welcome and fairness that pervaded it. Travelers found rest there, neighbors sought advice and assistance, and those in need never left empty-handed. Frederick grew into a thoughtful young man who combined his father's skill with horses and his mother's gift for healing. At 18, he left for Austin to study medicine, returning during holidays with stories of the changing world beyond their rural community. Emma, with her quick mind and independent spirit, developed a passion for teaching, eventually taking over the small school in Oak Ridge. Young James, to no one's surprise, showed a natural affinity for the land, shadowing his father through every aspect of running the farm from the time he could walk. In 1894, 20 years after their beginning, Forrest and Olivia celebrated their anniversary with a gathering that brought together friends, neighbors, and their now adult children. Frederick brought his fiancée, a capable young nurse he had met during his medical training. Emma came home from her teaching position, temporarily leaving the schoolhouse in the hands of her assistant. James, at 15, proudly served as host alongside his parents. After dinner, as lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk and conversation flowed easily among the guests, Frederick raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "who taught us by example that love is not just a feeling but a choice made every day. Who showed us that true partnership means supporting each other through all seasons, and who built not just a farm but a home where anyone in need could find comfort." "To Forrest and Olivia," echoed the gathered friends, 20 years and counting. Later, when the guests had departed and the children had retired to their rooms, Forrest and Olivia walked hand in hand to Charlotte's peach tree, now a magnificent presence with spreading branches that provided abundant fruit each summer. 20 years, Forrest mused, standing beneath the tree that had witnessed their journey. "It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "Time is strange that way," Olivia agreed. "When I think of all we've weathered, the droughts, the illnesses, Frederick's accident with that wild stallion, the time James decided to see if the chimney made a good sliding board," Forrest added with a chuckle. "The winter the wolves came too close to the house. The summer Emma decided she was running away to become a circus performer." They laughed together, these shared memories as precious to them as any treasure. Then Olivia's expression grew more serious. "I've been thinking about that auction in Riverside a lot lately," she said. "About how different my life would have been if you hadn't been there that day, if someone else had bought my contract." Forrest pulled her into his arms. "I don't believe that was chance, Olivia. I believe we were meant to find each other." She smiled up at him, the moonlight silvering her hair, now threaded with gray. "The romantic cowboy I married is still in there, I see. Always," he promised, kissing her softly. "Always." As they returned to their home, arm in arm beneath the vast canopy of stars, Olivia thought about the woman she had been, arms empty, heart broken, spirit nearly crushed by circumstances beyond her control. She thought about the man Forrest had been, solitary, wounded by war and loss, yearning for connection but afraid to reach for it. And she marveled at what they had become together, not perfect, not without struggles, but whole in a way neither could have achieved alone. Their scars had not disappeared, but they had faded, transformed into marks of survival rather than wounds that defined them. From that fateful day in Riverside when a cowboy saw a woman with empty arms at auction, bought her contract and said, "We start a life," they had built something neither could have imagined: a love that healed, a family that flourished, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As they closed the door of the home they had created together, Forrest looked at his wife, still beautiful to him after all these years, still the center of his world, and knew with absolute certainty that he would choose her again. Every day. For all the days they had left. "I love you, Olivia Fitzroy," he said simply, "today and always." "And I love you, Forrest Fitzroy," she replied, her voice soft but sure, "today and always." Their beginning had been unlikely, born of desperation and impulse. But their journey through hardship and joy, loss and abundance had proven that sometimes the most beautiful stories start in the most unexpected ways. And that love, when rooted in respect and nurtured with patience, can transform empty arms into a full heart, and a lonely existence into a life rich beyond measure.